The worst part about losing the promotion was not the disappointment itself. Disappointment is temporary. It fades after enough. Sleepless nights and enough forced smiles inside conference rooms where people pretend everything is normal. What stayed with me long after that morning in Manhattan was the realization that the decision had already been made before the interviews even began, and everyone inside the office seemed to understand it except me. My name is Ethan Brock, and I am 36 years old. For nearly 6 years I worked at Harrington & Cole Financial Consulting, a respected corporate advisory firm located near Park Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. The company specialized in restructuring failing businesses, analyzing investment risks, and advising corporate clients whose problems were usually measured in millions of dollars. It was the kind of environment where people survived through discipline, long hours, and the ability to endure constant pressure without showing weakness. I had built my entire professional life around that place. Most mornings began before sunrise while the streets outside still carried the quiet gray stillness that only exists in New York before the city fully wakes up. I would arrive early carrying coffee and unfinished reports, often staying long after sunset, while the office lights reflected against the glass towers surrounding the building. Over time, the routine stopped feeling temporary and slowly became my entire identity. Work consumed everything. Relationships disappeared, friendships faded. Vacations became postponed promises that never actually happened. But I accepted those sacrifices because I believed they were leading somewhere important. The promotion to Senior Strategy Director represented that future. Everyone inside the department expected me to receive it. Even clients occasionally assumed I already held the position because I handled many of the responsibilities unofficially long before management formally acknowledged it. I trained junior analysts, managed high-level presentations, corrected mistakes made by entire teams, and carried projects that directly increased revenue for the company during difficult financial quarters. Most importantly, I had earned the trust of clients. In consulting, that mattered more than anything, which was why the announcement that Monday morning felt so unreal at first. The entire department gathered inside the large conference room overlooking Lexington Avenue while executives discussed quarterly growth projections and upcoming corporate restructuring plans. The atmosphere felt routine until Richard Coleman, our department manager, finally shifted the meeting toward the promotion everyone had been waiting for. I remember sitting near the far end of the conference table watching rain slide slowly across the windows while Richard adjusted papers in front of him. For a brief moment our eyes met. Then he smiled politely before announcing that the position of Senior Strategy Director would officially go to Vanessa Reed. The room became strangely quiet afterward. Not shocked exactly, just uncomfortable. Several coworkers lowered their eyes immediately while others exchanged brief glances that disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. The reaction lasted only seconds before polite applause filled the conference room, but those few seconds told me everything. Nobody expected Vanessa to get the promotion. Not really. Vanessa had worked at Harrington & Cole for barely 18 months. She was intelligent and ambitious, but everyone inside the office understood she lacked the experience required for a position carrying that level of responsibility. She routinely missed details during project reviews, relied heavily on support from senior staff, and often disappeared during high-pressure situations where leadership actually mattered. Yet there she was, smiling confidently while Richard congratulated her in front of the entire department. I sat there listening to the applause while something cold slowly settled inside my chest. Not anger, not yet. Just confusion heavy enough to make the room suddenly feel distant around me. The rest of the meeting passed in fragments I barely remember. Richard continued discussing restructuring goals and performance targets, while Vanessa thanked leadership for believing in her potential. I heard the words without truly processing them because my attention remained fixed on one simple question repeating endlessly. Inside my mind, what had I missed? After the meeting ended, People filtered slowly back toward their offices and workstations. Several co-workers offered me sympathetic looks as they passed, the kind people give when they want to acknowledge something unfair without becoming involved in it directly. Only one person stopped beside my desk. Marcus Bennett. Marcus had worked at the firm longer than almost anyone in our division. At 40 years old, he carried himself with the calm exhaustion of someone who already understood how corporate politics operated long before younger employees began believing hard work alone guaranteed fairness. He placed a folder on my desk and quietly told me not to take the situation personally. The sentence bothered me immediately, because nobody says that unless there is something personal behind the decision. The rest of the day unfolded strangely. Vanessa moved through the office surrounded by congratulatory conversations while Richard seemed unusually attentive to her every interaction. He personally walked her through management procedures that normally would have been handled through HR orientation, and more than once I noticed the two of them disappearing together into his office for long stretches of time. At first I tried convincing myself I was simply overanalyzing the situation because of disappointment. But the more I observed them, the more something began feeling wrong beneath the surface. Small details started connecting themselves. The private lunches, the unusual favoritism during meetings, the way Richard defended Vanessa aggressively whenever clients questioned her decisions, the way Vanessa carried herself with a level of confidence that suggested she already knew outcomes before anyone else. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the office had shifted completely. People avoided discussing the promotion directly around me. But silence often reveals more than words ever could. I could feel it. In the careful way conversations stopped, when I entered certain rooms, I could see it in the uncomfortable expressions co-workers exchanged, before quickly changing subjects. Something about the promotion felt dishonest, and deep down everyone seemed aware of it. That evening I remained in the office long. After most employees left for the night, rain continued falling outside while midtown traffic moved slowly beneath the glowing lights of Manhattan. I sat alone reviewing financial reports that no longer held my attention, while Vanessa's promotion announcement replayed endlessly in my mind. Around 8:30, I finally gathered my things and headed toward the elevators. As I crossed the hallway near Richard's office, I noticed the door slightly open. Inside, Richard and Vanessa stood unusually close together beside his desk. The atmosphere between them felt nothing like a normal conversation between manager and employee. Richard leaned toward her with a familiarity that immediately tightened something inside my chest, while Vanessa smiled in a way I had never seen during ordinary workplace interactions. Then Richard placed his hand lightly against her lower back. The movement lasted only a second, but it changed everything. Neither of them noticed me, standing in the hallway. I kept walking without making a sound, but by the time the elevator doors closed, in front of me, the confusion I carried all day had already started transforming into something darker, suspicion. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, I stared at my reflection in the polished metal doors, while a painful realization slowly began taking shape inside my mind. Maybe I had not lost the promotion because I lacked qualifications. Maybe the competition had never been real in the first place. And somewhere deep down, another thought followed immediately behind it. If what I suspected was true, then I was only beginning to understand how dishonest the people above me really were. The following weeks passed beneath a strange tension that seemed to spread quietly throughout the entire department. Vanessa settled into her new role with surprising confidence despite her lack of experience, and Richard's favoritism became increasingly difficult to ignore once I started paying attention carefully. At first, the changes appeared subtle enough for management to dismiss if questioned. Vanessa received high-profile client meetings that normally required years of experience. Her mistakes disappeared. From performance reviews, deadlines were quietly extended whenever she struggled. Meanwhile, additional responsibilities slowly shifted onto me without recognition or explanation. I handled the difficult work while Vanessa received the visible credit, and somewhere inside the growing silence of the office, I began realizing this situation was far bigger than one stolen promotion. It was about corruption. And corruption always leaves traces behind if someone watches closely enough. The more closely I observed Richard and Vanessa, the more impossible it became to dismiss the strange atmosphere surrounding them. Richard's favoritism no longer looked accidental once I paid attention consistently. He protected Vanessa from criticism in ways he never protected anyone else. He adjusted schedules to accommodate her mistakes. He reassigned difficult responsibilities away from her whenever pressure increased. During meetings, he constantly redirected conversations whenever clients questioned her decisions, often stepping in before she even had the opportunity to answer for herself. Meanwhile, the rest of us carried the consequences quietly. Projects fell behind because inexperienced leadership slowed entire teams. Clients became frustrated. Late nights inside the office became normal again, while Vanessa left early carrying the authority of a title she had not earned. The entire department felt it. Nobody said it openly, but everyone felt it. One Thursday evening near the end of October, I remained in the office reviewing client, restructuring documents long after most. Employees had already gone home. Rain hammered softly against the windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan, while rows of empty desks stretched silently across the darkened office floor. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus Bennett approached my desk carrying 2 cups of coffee. Without asking permission, he sat across from me and placed one of the cups beside my laptop. For several moments he said nothing. Then he looked toward Richard's office near the far end of the floor before quietly asking whether I had noticed how often Vanessa stayed late recently. The question immediately tightened something inside me. I answered carefully, saying only that management seemed unusually invested in helping her succeed. Marcus gave a slow, tired smile that carried more frustration than amusement. Then he leaned back in the chair and finally said the thing nobody else inside the company seemed willing to admit openly. The promotion was never truly competitive. According to Marcus, rumors about Richard and Vanessa had circulated quietly for months before the official announcement. At first, most employees ignored the speculation because office gossip appears constantly inside corporate environments where stressed people search for distractions between deadlines. But over time, the rumors became harder to dismiss. Richard and Vanessa frequently disappeared during business trips for unexplained stretches of time. Private meetings appeared on calendars without official purposes attached. Vanessa received confidential information long before other department managers, and several employees had already noticed the personal familiarity between them during after-hours events. Listening to Marcus speak, I felt something cold settling deeper into my chest with every sentence, not because the information surprised me anymore, but because the pieces finally started fitting together clearly enough to form a complete picture. I asked Marcus why nobody reported it. He looked at me quietly for several seconds before answering in the calm voice of someone already exhausted by years inside corporate systems that rewarded silence more often than honesty, because Richard protected people who stayed useful to him, and because companies rarely investigate corruption unless someone forces them to. After Marcus left that evening, I remained alone inside the office, staring through the glass windows at the blurred Manhattan skyline while the truth slowly settled around me. I thought about every late night I sacrificed for the company, every weekend lost to client emergencies, every promotion review where management praised my commitment while quietly preparing someone else's future behind closed doors. The realization felt humiliating in a way that reached deeper than career disappointment. I had not been outperformed. I had been manipulated. Over the following weeks, I stopped focusing emotionally on the promotion itself and began paying attention to something far more important: evidence. The advantage of being underestimated is that people become careless around you. Richard assumed disappointment would eventually push me toward resignation or emotional withdrawal like most employees passed over unfairly inside corporate environments. Vanessa seemed even more confident after the promotion, moving through the office with the relaxed arrogance of someone protected from consequences. Neither of them realized I had started watching carefully, Patterns emerged quickly once I focused objectively, instead of emotionally. Vanessa's access to confidential client information consistently appeared before official departmental distribution. Richard approved expense reports connected to trips where company records showed unusual discrepancies in scheduling. Late-night meetings appeared on calendars during hours when building. Security logs recorded only 2 remaining employees on entire office floors. Individually, the details meant very little. Together, they created a disturbing pattern of favoritism, misuse of authority, and possible ethics violations. Still, suspicion alone changes. Nothing inside corporations designed to protect management unless undeniable proof forces action, which meant I needed something stronger than assumptions. The opportunity arrived unexpectedly during a client crisis involving a restructuring account tied to a major logistics company based in Brooklyn. Vanessa mishandled several financial projections during preliminary presentations, creating inconsistencies serious enough to jeopardize the deal entirely. Richard immediately shifted most corrective responsibilities onto me while publicly framing the situation as a team adjustment process. For 3 exhausting days, I rebuilt the entire presentation structure almost alone, while Vanessa attended executive meetings discussing strategy she barely understood. Late on the 3rd evening, I entered one of the smaller conference rooms searching for missing financial files connected to the project. That was when I found Richard's tablet sitting unattended on the conference table. At first, I intended to ignore it completely. Then the screen lit up with an incoming message notification before the display dimmed again. The message preview showed Vanessa's name, and beneath it, only a partial sentence appeared visible before the notification disappeared. Last night was exactly what I needed after. I stared at the dark screen while my pulse slowly tightened. For several seconds, I simply stood there wrestling with the decision forming inside my head. Years of professional discipline told me to walk away immediately, but another part of me understood something equally important. People willing to manipulate careers, salaries, and corporate authority through secret relationships rarely stop at small ethical compromises. Eventually, I picked up the tablet. What followed removed every remaining doubt. The message history between Richard and Vanessa stretched back months, filled with personal conversations, hotel arrangements during business travel, discussions about office politics, and repeated references to the promotion process long before official interviews even began. One message in particular stayed burned into my memory afterward. Weeks before the promotion announcement, Vanessa asked whether Ethan would become suspicious if the decision looked too obvious. Richard responded by saying it would not matter because hard-working employees always convince themselves the system is fair until it is too late. Reading those words felt like swallowing broken glass, not because they hurt emotionally, but because of how accurately they described the person I used to be. I copied everything carefully. Messages, dates, travel records, internal discussions connected to performance reviews and promotion decisions. Then I placed the tablet exactly where I found it and walked calmly back toward my desk while the office around me suddenly felt colder than before. By the time I reached the elevators later that night, something inside me had fundamentally changed. The pain of betrayal was gone. In its place remained clarity. Richard and Vanessa believed they controlled the narrative because they controlled authority inside the department. What they failed to understand was that corruption becomes dangerous the moment someone stops reacting emotionally and starts thinking strategically. And for the first time since losing the promotion, I finally understood exactly how their careers were going to end. For weeks after discovering the messages on Richard's tablet, I behaved exactly the way they expected me to behave. I arrived early, completed assignments without complaint, attended meetings, and maintained the calm professional image that made me easy to underestimate in the first place. Richard continued treating me like a dependable employee whose ambition had already been quietly neutralized, while Vanessa moved through the office carrying herself with growing confidence as her authority expanded. inside the department. Neither of them realized I had already stopped caring about the promotion. The promotion no longer mattered. What mattered was exposing the corruption that allowed people like them to manipulate careers while pretending to represent professionalism and leadership. And exposing corruption requires timing. The evidence alone was not enough yet. Private messages between a manager and an employee could create scandal. But scandal does not always destroy careers inside powerful companies unless the behavior directly threatens corporate stability, financial integrity, or legal compliance. I needed something stronger than an affair. I needed proof that their relationship had directly influenced business decisions. Fortunately for me, arrogance often makes dishonest people careless over time. Vanessa's promotion quickly began creating operational problems across multiple client accounts. She lacked the experience necessary for high-level strategy management, and, despite Richard's constant protection, mistakes started accumulating faster than the department could quietly correct them. Financial forecasts arrived incomplete. Client communication deadlines were missed. Several restructuring recommendations contained serious calculation errors that exposed the company to unnecessary risk. Each time problems surfaced, Richard redirected blame carefully toward the team rather than Vanessa specifically. Extra work shifted onto employees already overwhelmed by impossible schedules while Vanessa continued, presenting herself publicly as an emerging executive success story. But pressure changes people, especially people pretending to be more capable than they truly are. By mid-November, the atmosphere inside the office had become tense enough that even senior executives outside our division started noticing inconsistencies. Client complaints increased, productivity slowed, internal disagreements between departments became harder to contain, and quietly behind the scenes, I continued collecting evidence, expense reports connected to unnecessary business travel email, approvals bypassing standard review procedures, internal communications showing Richard assigning Vanessa confidential projects before official authorization existed. Most importantly, I documented how decisions benefiting Vanessa repeatedly harmed client performance and departmental efficiency. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. Richard was no longer managing the department professionally. He was protecting his relationship. The opportunity to expose everything arrived during preparations for one of the company's largest quarterly executive reviews, held at the firm's headquarters near Madison Avenue. Senior leadership from multiple divisions would attend, including financial compliance officers and corporate HR executives responsible for internal oversight. Among them was Olivia Grant, the company's HR director. Olivia carried a reputation throughout the firm for being calm, intelligent, and extremely difficult to manipulate once ethical concerns reached her attention. Unlike most executives, she had little patience for internal politics that threatened corporate credibility, which made her exactly the person I needed. 3 days before the executive review, I requested a private meeting with her under the formal classification of confidential ethical concerns regarding departmental leadership. The meeting took place late in the evening after most employees had already left the office. I remember sitting across from Olivia inside a quiet conference room, overlooking the glowing Manhattan skyline while traffic moved endlessly below the building. She listened carefully without interrupting, while I explained everything from the promotion process to the hidden relationship between Richard and Vanessa. Then I presented the evidence: message records, expense reports, travel documentation, internal communications, performance inconsistencies, tied directly to favoritism. The room remained silent for a long time after I finished speaking. Olivia reviewed the documents carefully while her expression slowly hardened with every page. What disturbed her most was not the affair itself. It was the abuse of authority connected to it. By the time the meeting ended, I understood immediately that the situation had moved far beyond office gossip or professional jealousy. This had become a corporate liability investigation. The following days inside, Harrington and Cole felt strangely calm on the surface, but tension moved quietly beneath every interaction, like pressure building before a storm. Richard behaved normally during meetings, while Vanessa continued managing projects with forced confidence, completely unaware that formal investigations had already begun behind closed doors. I said nothing. I simply watched. The executive review meeting arrived on a coldy Monday morning near the end of November. Senior leadership gathered inside the largest conference room on the 32nd floor while department heads prepared presentations discussing quarterly performance results and future strategic goals. Richard appeared unusually confident that morning. Vanessa sat beside him, reviewing presentation materials while executives filled the room one by one. The meeting began routinely enough. Financial updates, client acquisition reports, operational restructuring summaries. Then, halfway through Richard's departmental presentation, Olivia Grant entered the conference room accompanied by 2 corporate compliance officers. The atmosphere changed instantly. Richard stopped speaking mid-sentence as Olivia calmly informed executive leadership that certain ethical and procedural concerns regarding management conduct required immediate review before the meeting could continue. I will never forget the expression on Richard's face during that moment. Confusion appeared first, then fear, then the slow realization that something far larger than ordinary office politics had just entered the room. Olivia presented the investigation findings methodically and without emotion. She outlined evidence showing improper favoritism tied directly to a personal relationship between Richard and Vanessa. She explained how promotion procedures had been manipulated, how company resources had been misused, and how management authority had repeatedly been abused in ways that compromised operational integrity. The silence inside the conference room became unbearable. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Vanessa looked completely frozen beside the conference table while Richard attempted to defend himself with explanations that sounded weaker each time he spoke. But evidence leaves little space for manipulation once placed directly in front of executives whose primary concern is protecting corporate stability. By the end of the meeting, both of them were removed from leadership responsibilities. Pending full investigation, security escorted Richard from the E building later that afternoon. Vanessa left shortly afterward, carrying a small box of personal belongings while employees throughout the office watched quietly from behind computer screens and conference room glass. Nobody looked surprised. That was the part that stayed with me most afterward. Nobody looked surprised, because deep down the entire office had already sensed something dishonest happening for months. They simply lacked proof. The following weeks transformed the company rapidly. Leadership restructuring began almost immediately while corporate compliance teams reviewed multiple projects connected to Richard's department. Several employees privately approached me afterward, admitting they suspected corruption long before the investigation became public. Marcus simply nodded the first time we spoke after everything collapsed, as if the outcome had become inevitable. The moment I stopped accepting the situation silently. What surprised me most, however, came several weeks later. Instead of offering me the same promotion I originally lost, senior leadership proposed something entirely different. Due to my handling of several major accounts during the departmental crisis, another division within the company requested my transfer into a newly created strategic advisory role, carrying greater authority and significantly better compensation than the original promotion ever offered. The irony stayed with me for a long time afterward. The B position I once fought desperately to earn no longer even mattered by comparison, because somewhere during those difficult months, my priorities had changed. I no longer wanted validation from corrupt people pretending to reward merit. I wanted respect earned honestly. On my first morning inside the new office overlooking the East River, I stood quietly near the windows, watching sunlight spread slowly across Manhattan while employees filled the streets below. For the first time in years, work no longer felt like survival. It felt clean again. And deep down I realized something important. Betrayal becomes dangerous for the people responsible once the person they underestimated finally stops, reacting emotionally and starts paying attention carefully. Because dishonest people often believe power protects them forever, until the day the truth walks into the room, carrying evidence they can no longer control.